okay, where do you stand on the LNG pause? Where do you stand on permitting? Where do you stand on the use of federal lands and waters for oil and gas production? We haven't even gotten that far in the debate, in the discussion in this presidential election, which is unfortunate.
My name is Mike Mauceli, and this is the Energy Show with REI Energy, where we're energizing your investments and maximizing your tax deductions. Today, we're going to be talking about Kamala's fracking problem. You're going to discover how fracking became this election's political hot potato issue and why Kamala Harris is flip-flopping on the issue. My guest today is Tim Tarpley. Tim is the Energy Workforce and Technology Council Senior Vice President, Government Affairs. Great to have you on the show today, Tim. Well, Tim, thank you for coming on the show today.
Appreciate you inviting me. Glad to be here.
So, can you tell us a little bit about your organization?
Sure. Energy Workforce and Technology Council, we're the National Trade Association for Energy Services and Technology Companies. So we represent about 200 companies all across the space. Companies like Halliburton, Baker Hughes, SLB, household names that you hear about, but also small and medium sized well servicing companies, equipment manufacturing companies that operate all over the United States. As our name suggests, we're a big portion of the country's energy workforce. About 650,000 men and women work for our companies in all 50 states. So we're a really big cross section of the folks that produce the energy that this country and the world needs every day.
Well, that's great. Do y'all do any type of wind or solar type work either, or just mainly oil and gas?
Primarily oil and gas is where most of our companies make a significant portion of the revenue, but a lot of our companies are in new energies as well, some wind, some solar, a lot of geothermal, hydrogen, carbon capture, really anywhere where there's new technologies that are moving forward, our companies are right in the mix of that.
So, how did fracking become such a big hot potato political issue all of a sudden?
Well, it's funny, you hear a lot of the debates going on, and you would think, to an outside observer, that fracking is the only issue in energy because it's the only one they get to ever talk about. It's just kind of this 2-second soundbite where, clearly, Kamala Harris has changed her position on fracking from what it was when she ran in 2019 to what it was when she was vice president to what it is now. And that's fine. People change their views. Certainly, 8 out of 10 Americans, recent polling has shown, support oil and gas production here in the United States. So I'm actually not surprised she changed her position. The American public is not with her prior position, so that's good. But there's also a lot more to energy policy than simply just fracking, and that's where we're lacking. We haven't seen a follow-up to those questions that actually tell us, okay, where do you stand on the LNG pause? Where do you stand on permitting? Where do you stand on the use of federal lands and waters for oil and gas production? We haven't even gotten that far in the debate, in the discussion in this presidential election, which is unfortunate.
Well, I think you're probably right. I mean, you don't really hear a lot of the main issues like you pointed out, like permitting. I mean, that's where the EPA and as far as is the big hammer, and then of course you have all of this the basically BLM land. Places
Mhm.
like New Mexico that probably 70% of its land is government land, and Wyoming
Sure.
also, and but I think the main thing that Kamala's trying to get across, just to the people in Pennsylvania, basically that, hey, I'm for fracking, I'm not for the oil and gas business, but I'm for fracking, right?
Yeah, I do think that her advisors are having her talk just directly to Pennsylvania there when she talks about fracking, because I mean, as you and I know, public lands only represent 24% of the production currently in the United States. So that's the only authority that the federal government, that a president would have to alter fracking, would be on those public lands.
Yeah.
Vast majority Pennsylvania production is going to be private lands. Now the state could take action against fracking, as we've seen in New York State, but that's a totally different story. The president is not the one that has that authority, and that kind of distinction has also been lost in in the debate, unfortunately.
Yeah, I have people ask me that all the time, well,
Yeah,
I mean, is it going to, because we primarily drill over in Oklahoma and North Dakota,
right.
so I have people ask me all the time, well, what happens if Kamala gets elected? Is she going to be able to shut down fracking? And I tell them just what you just said, that
Yeah,
the majority of the land in Oklahoma and North Dakota, thank God, is owned by private people, right? So
right,
people can
right.
drill and they can frack on it.
Sure. Well, and not to say the federal lands aren't important. Certainly we saw at the beginning of the Biden administration, they paused, new leasing and permitting out west and on the federal lands. And we have a slowdown going on offshore, that's really continued since the beginning of the administration. So not to say there's not things they could do to slow down production. However, we need to ask those questions specifically of the candidates and maybe get a little bit away from just this back and forth on fracking because as we've just discussed, it's only one part of a much bigger puzzle.
Yeah. So, I guess Kamala, she's so concerned about fracking in Pennsylvania and not concerned about it anywhere else in the United States.
Right. There is a lot of focus on certainly on Pennsylvania. It looks like this election could be decided Pennsylvania, Georgia. Obviously, it's a very, very close race, and yeah, an issue like this could sway enough voters to flip the whole state. So, it's just politics.
Now, so the majority of the production in Pennsylvania is natural gas, correct?
The vast majority. Yeah.
Yeah. And so are there refineries or and stuff along the East Coast, or are they primarily in South Texas? That's in Louisiana.
For gas, I mean, well, some of that gas is pushed out, for export, and a lot of it's used in the region for power production and other sources. So, I
Yeah.
mean, the Marcellus is a great resource for the United States. I mean, just think of all the population that is
Oh,
around
yeah.
that region. The real unfortunate thing is that it's very difficult, if not impossible, to get a pipeline through New York State. So you got all these folks that live east in New York State and Boston and that whole region. They're very thirsty for gas, and you can't get it to them unless you sail it around on a boat, which is just kind of silly. So hopefully we can get permitting reform and get those folks a lot of that gas coming out of the Marcellus that can help fuel their economy.
Yeah, because the Marcellus, it goes up into California, doesn't it? I mean,
Or
not California, excuse me, up into New York.
it does, and they don't allow fracking on the New York across the New York line. They prohibited that, which is
You-
yeah frustrating. They're not only they don't permit fracking within the state, but they also won't let you get a pipeline through to provide the resources that everybody needs.
You would think that with all the fuel oil that's burned in New York, that they would want clean natural gas up in that part of the world.
I
A lot of
know.
these politicians just don't make any sense, do they?
It's frustrating. Yeah, if you talk to some of those politicians that represent folks on the east side, up there in New England, they're very frustrated because you have one state that's basically dictating their energy policy. They don't even get a say in it. So it's real frustrating.
So when Trump comes out and says, drill, baby, drill, what power does a president have to encourage oil and gas drilling?
Well, it's funny to look at it from the other side too, is the president does have some power, and certainly I think what the industry would appreciate about a second Trump administration is the predictability on the things that the federal government does control. And that's
Right.
going to be leasing, that's going to be permitting for federal lands and especially for federal waters. I mean, this administration has only had their leasing plan that they released has one lease sale scheduled. That's the
Mhm.
the least amount of lease sales we've ever had in the whole history of the offshore lease program. So those kind of things are frustrating. In a Trump administration, we wouldn't have that. We would have leases on a regular schedule. I'm confident of that. I would hope that we would move forward on permitting reform. Obviously, that's a difficult puzzle. It's not something that the president can necessarily, just unilaterally do on their own. They're going to have to work it through Congress, and we understand that. And it certainly, if you look at the way this election could go, it's very, very possible we have a split decision. President Trump could win, and then we may have a Democratic Senate or a Democratic House. Vice President Harris could win, and we may have a Republican Senate. So we may be looking at a split decision, which makes things like permitting reform more difficult because you got to get a bipartisan consensus to get that
Right.
over the
And I
finish
don't
line.
think people, I mean, obviously they throw around the term, I'm for fracking, but as you said earlier, I don't think the population really understands, the amount of, clean, reliable energy that the oil and gas provides for the country. And, it
Right.
makes all of our lives a lot easier. And yet we've got these politicians that are dictating, as far as what goes on in the U.S. from an energy standpoint. I mean, and they all, put it under the banner of climate change, which, we all know the climate is changing, but as I said, we can't destroy our way of life just to, obviously, the way some of these politicians want us to do.
It's true, and my hope is that we're starting to see a bipartisan consensus. The war between Russia and Ukraine has reminded everybody that it matters where you get your energy, and it matters that you have a domestic source of energy. I think that combined with the fact that we're seeing power projections for the amount of power that the United States is going to need in the next 2 decades is significant. Things like AI and data centers, they're huge. The power demands in all the regions across the United States are going to be a lot more significant. I personally, and if you look at the numbers, it doesn't appear there's any way to get and meet those demands other than a build out of natural gas power generation. And it's also cleaner, much cleaner than coal as we transition those coal-fired power plants to natural gas. I think that's a win, not only, as you mentioned, for emissions, but it's a win for the United States our ability to compete on the world scale, to have the power to provide for industry that we're going to need in the coming 2 decades. So I'm hoping that there's a bipartisan kind of realization of that, and you kind of got to step back and say, how are we going to do this? Well, natural gas really is the logical choice, really, any way you look at it.
Yeah, I mean, we have such an abundance of natural gas here in the United States. I mean, even when we're drilling oil wells, I mean, obviously a certain part of that oil that comes up, has associated gases with it. And in fact, out in West Texas, they can't even, they have to pay to take the gas away because it's such a cheap
Mm-hmm.
commodity. And it seems to me that, that people would want an inexpensive commodity. It's almost too cheap. You almost can't afford to drill it at $2.25 an MCF.
It's true. That's a whole nother problem. But you're right. It's a resource we have here domestically, and we're blessed with that. Not every
Yeah.
country has that. I mean, look at Europe. They're out there trying to buy gas from anybody that'll sell it to them. They don't. Well, I mean, part of that's because they don't produce what they could produce there anymore. But that's a different story. But we're blessed with a big domestic resource that really can help support our economy for generations, and we need to utilize that.
So why do you think Harris and Biden shut down the LNG plants that are being built?
Yeah, great question. My personal view is the administration was afraid of their left flank. They were getting a lot of criticism for other issues from the left flank. Perhaps the war in Israel, other things. There was a feeling that they came out really strong against oil and gas at the first year of the administration, and then they kind of dialed it back because I think reality started setting in, and they had to pull some of those anti oil and gas positions back, like the lease pause, etc. So I feel like they felt like there was a little bit of a pushback from kind of their left and the environmental flank, and they thought they had to throw them a bone. Well, that was the wrong bone to throw. Slowing down permitting for LNG exports, and given the current geopolitical climate, is self-destructing. I mean, the world needs gas. It makes sense economically for us to be the ones that produce it. We also produce some of the cleanest produced gas in the world. So if you're talking about emissions, someone else is going to produce the gas and export it to these countries. Why wouldn't we rather do it here in the United States, where we decide how it's produced, and it also helps our economy? So it was really just a counterintuitive decision. I think it was more political than it was based on actual energy policy. Even a lot of folks within his own administration have kind of quietly said, "Hey, this maybe isn't the best idea. We're going to try to get this over with as soon as possible." Folks like Senator Fetterman in Pennsylvania, Democrats, even Angus King up in Maine, who is by no means a friend of oil and gas, has come out and said, "Wait a second, this doesn't make any sense. Let's look at this again." So I think I say he, the president, I think he's lost even support from his own folks on this. I do think that it's time for them to walk that back, and my hope is in the scenario that Vice President Harris does win, she doesn't double down on this, and she opens it back up, as her administration starts off.
So they really turned on Manchin, didn't they? Senator Manchin, as far as getting that pipeline pushed through.
The Mountain Valley.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, he was able to get the Mountain Valley language through Congress, as part of that bipartisan package, which was kind of shocking. It was pretty strong language. He was able to pull that off. He's pushed back a lot on the LNG pause, but he is chairman of the Senate Energy. But that pushback hasn't been enough. I think you know the good news is there is very strong language in the bipartisan permitting bill that Manchin
Mm.
put together out of Senate Energy that does end the pause, and it requires a 90-day permit time for these permits.
Oh,
Whether
that's
it's
good.
going to get across the finish line this year, anybody's guess. My bet, unfortunately, is probably no. The politics aren't going to line up, but if it does, there's really strong language in there, and then hopefully, if it doesn't, they come back at it next year and they leave that language in, so we can just end this once and for all, and take politics out of permits for LNG exports.
So when you were talking a little bit earlier about the clean, natural gas, I mean, how the emissions, low emissions and stuff. I mean,
Mhm.
why would the U.S. buy oil from Venezuela, which is probably some of the dirtiest oil in the world? I mean, but yet they're willing to buy that instead of produce it here in the United States.
It doesn't make a lot of sense. And, the statistic I always, go back to if I'm talking to, either Republicans or even, friends on the Democratic aisle, I remind them that since 2005, the United States has lowered our total emissions profile more than any other country in the world. And the primary reason that we've done that, this is according to EIA, which is a nonpartisan, government organization, is from transitioning coal-fired power generation to natural gas. So why would we not, number one, do more of that here in the United States? If you're winning, keep up a good thing. Second of all, why wouldn't we be getting our friends and allies to do the same thing abroad, that we did here? It worked. We got the formula. So it just doesn't make a lot of sense to, if you figured out a formula that works, why not just keep doing it? But obviously politics comes in and can get in the way of reason sometimes.
Yeah, even the service industry, like the fracking, a lot of your new frack trucks are use natural gas to frack with, right? They don't use
Right.
diesel any longer.
Right. A lot
So
of our companies are, building that technology into the market and have had a lot of success with it. And there's
yeah,
opportunity to export that technology abroad, and help our friends abroad with the same emissions benefits that has here in the United States.
yeah, I think the U.S. industry's done a lot, I mean, as far as to try to reduce the amount of emissions and, the way that we do things in the industry. But, I don't know if the industry just has a hard time of putting that information out there because you really don't see it anywhere unless you go out and look for it. I
It's
know.
true. Sometimes we don't engage as much maybe in the public space as we should. We don't get credit for the things that we've done, especially with efficiencies. We are, over 250% more efficient, than we were even 10 years ago. That's an incredible emission savings just in a decade. And that number and that discussion are sometimes lost in the political debate. We're producing more energy more efficiently than we've ever done before, and that's a good story for everybody.
Yeah, in fact, the technology, I mean, we're like you just we're producing more energy today than we ever have in history.
Right.
And simply because of technology and the
Mhm.
way that we've been able to redesign the fracks and get more oil and gas out to have the wells where they don't have such high decline rates and
Yep.
they're more stable than they were in the past, which allows us to produce more. But then when you have these politicians that come out and want to destroy the industry or shut the industry down, I mean, a lot of people leave the industry and they never come back because obviously,
Mhm.
why would you want to? Well, if you're a young person going to college, I mean, why would you want to be a petroleum engineer where you don't even know if you're going to have a job in 10
Yeah.
years?
No, it's true. It's a lot of what we do as a trade association is to engage with young folks and try to bring them into the industry and say, hey, if you want to solve a lot of these energy problems that are out there in the world, there's no better place to work than
Yeah.
U.S. energy service companies. I mean, look, they're out here solving these issues right now. The technologies are solving it. But yeah, it's a lot of education that needs to go on to the public. And unfortunately, we have folks on the other side that are trying to tell them different.
Yeah, I mean, they obviously have a bigger megaphone, I guess, than the oil and gas industry does. Everybody's
Right.
just trying to keep their heads down and just do their jobs.
Right. Yeah, waking up 9 to 5, do their job. They're not out there, engaged in the public space, unfortunately, as much
Yeah.
as maybe we need to be.
Well, anyway, it was great to have you on the show today, and I'd love to have you back in the future, Tim.
Oh, I would be glad to join anytime. I really appreciated the discussion and happy to come back.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
This podcast is a presentation of Rich Dad Media Network.